The afternoon sun fell softly on the quiet courtyard of the small ancestral home in Vadnagar. The sound of sparrows filled the air, and the smell of fresh tea leaves drifted from the open kitchen door. It was a day that was meant to be simple, yet it was a day that would stay in the hearts of those who witnessed it forever. Sundar Pichai stepped into the courtyard, his hands folded in a respectful greeting. Though he had met world leaders, billionaires, and innovators across the globe, there was something humbling about standing here. This was not the grand setting of a political hall or a corporate boardroom. This was Narendra Modi's childhood home, and sitting inside was the woman who had shaped much of his early life, Hiraba Modi. Narendra Modi himself was standing near the doorway, speaking quietly to a visitor when he turned and saw Sundar. For a moment, there was only silence between them, the kind that holds meaning beyond words. Sundar expected a handshake, a polite exchange, perhaps even a seat across the room. Instead, Modi's eyes softened. "Come," he said gently, stepping forward. "Sit beside Ma." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of trust. In India, being invited to sit beside someone's mother was more than hospitality. It was acceptance into the family's inner circle. Sundar's breath caught for a second. He had been prepared for questions, for polite conversation, but not for this. As they walked in, Sundar noticed Hiraba sitting near the window on a wooden chair, her white sari draped neatly over her shoulder, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She looked up, her face lined with the gentle marks of time, yet her eyes still bright with warmth. There was no sign of formality in her gaze, only the kind of welcome that made a person feel seen. Sundar sat down carefully beside her. She turned slightly toward him, studying him for a moment, then smiled. "You have come from far away," she said softly. He nodded. "Yes, Ma, from America. But today it feels like I have come home." Her smile deepened, and for a moment, the air in the room seemed to still. Narendra Modi remained standing, watching them, his usual commanding presence replaced by something gentler. But even in that calmness, Sundar felt a weight. He knew he had come here not only to meet Hiraba, but also to speak about something important, something that connected technology, education, and the future of millions of young minds in India. Yet here, in the presence of this elderly woman who had once lived without electricity in her home, all his prepared words felt different. Hiraba's voice broke the silence again. "My son tells me you have done well in life." Sundar's eyes dropped for a moment. "I have been fortunate, Ma. But I know many children in small towns who are just as capable. They only need a chance." Her gaze sharpened slightly, as if she could see the thought behind his words. "And you want to give them that chance?" He looked up, surprised at her directness. "Yes, Ma. I believe they deserve it." Before he could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside. A group of local children had gathered near the open gate, peeking in shyly, whispering to each other about the visitor they had only heard of in news stories. Hiraba noticed them and gestured for someone to open the door wider. The children stepped inside hesitantly. Their clothes were simple, their eyes wide. Sundar felt a sudden pull in his heart. He saw in them a reflection of himself as a boy in Chennai, curious but unsure if the world beyond his street was meant for him. Narendra Modi placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder. "This is why you are here," he said quietly, almost as if reading his thoughts. "These are the faces of the future, and Ma believes the future must be built with kindness before ambition." Hiraba leaned slightly forward, speaking in a voice that carried the weight of both experience and hope. "You build machines," she said. "But will you also build lives?" The question was not one Sundar had expected, yet it was one he could not ignore. His throat tightened as he answered. "Yes, Ma, I will try. Not just with money, but with heart." For a long moment, No one spoke. Outside, the sparrows sang again. Then, Hiraba reached out and placed her frail hand over his. "Good," she said softly, "because when you give with heart, the gift never ends." It was then Sundar realized this meeting was not just a visit. It was a beginning, one that would challenge him not only as a leader, but as a human being. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the first step of a journey he could not turn away from. The sun had shifted higher in the sky, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. The children who had entered earlier now stood quietly in a line, their eyes darting between Sundar Pichai, Narendra Modi, and Hiraba Modi. There was no loud chatter, no restless shuffling, just a silent curiosity that seemed to hold the air still. Sundar looked at them carefully. Their shirts were worn, some buttons missing, and their shoes were scuffed or mismatched. Yet their faces carried the unmistakable spark of possibility. It reminded him of his own childhood days when his family had to choose carefully how to spend each rupee, yet his mind was filled with dreams far bigger than their small home could contain. Narendra Modi broke the silence. "These children live nearby. They are bright, but their school lacks many things: books, computers, even clean desks." He paused for a moment before adding, "I wanted you to see them with your own eyes, not just hear about them." Hiraba shifted slightly in her chair, her gaze steady on Sundar. "Knowledge is not in books alone, but books open the door to it," she said. "When a child's hand reaches for a book, it should never come back empty." Sundar nodded slowly. "Ma, I understand. At Google, we have worked to make information available to everyone. But making it available is only half the work. The other half is making it reachable." One of the children, a thin boy with neatly combed hair, stepped forward nervously. He held a small, tattered notebook in his hands. "Sir," he said in a trembling voice, "my school has only one old computer, and sometimes it does not start. I want to learn coding. Can you help?" The boy's words struck deep. Sundar could have given a diplomatic answer, a polite promise. But standing here, beside Hiraba, and under the watchful eyes of these children, he felt the weight of truth pressing on him. He crouched down so he could speak to the boy directly, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, I will help, and I will not just send one computer. I will make sure your school has many, and that there are teachers who can guide you." The boy's eyes widened, a faint smile breaking across his face, but before Sundar could stand again, Hiraba spoke. "Words are good," she said gently, "but a promise is only alive when it walks." Narendra Modi smiled faintly at his mother's words. "Ma means action must follow," he explained. Sundar looked at Hiraba and nodded. "Then let it walk, Ma. I will begin the work tomorrow." But even as he said it, he knew that bringing computers was just one step. There were bigger barriers: poverty, lack of access to the internet, and the deep-rooted belief in some places that technology was only for the rich. Breaking those barriers would take more than a donation. It would take a movement. Hiraba must have sensed the depth of his thoughts because she leaned toward him and said softly, "The mountain does not fall in one strike, Beta. It falls when the strikes do not stop." The children were now gathering closer, their fear replaced by quiet excitement. Sundar began asking each one about their dreams. Some wanted to be doctors, others engineers, a few teachers. One little girl in a blue dress simply said, "I want to read all the books in the world." That sentence stayed with him, because in that moment, he realized something. Technology was not just about machines or data. It was about giving a child like her the ability to reach any book, any lesson, any dream. Narendra Modi placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder again. "This courtyard has seen many visitors, But only a few leave with Ma's blessing. You now carry her hope as well. Be careful, Sundar. It is heavy, but it will guide you. The afternoon light began to fade, and the children were slowly led back toward the gate. Before leaving, the boy with the notebook turned back and waved at Sundar, his eyes shining with a new kind of belief. Sundar watched him go, then turned to Hiraba. Ma, he said quietly, today you gave me more than a blessing. You gave me a responsibility. Hiraba smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. Good, because the world is waiting for people who see responsibility as a gift, not a burden. And Sundar knew deep within that this journey had truly begun, not in an office, not in a meeting, but here, in a quiet courtyard in Vadnagar. The next morning, the quiet courtyard in Vadnagar was filled with the faint smell of fresh tea and the sound of light conversation. Sundar Pichai had stayed the night in the nearby guest house, but his mind had hardly rested. The faces of the children from the previous day, especially the boy with the notebook and the girl in the blue dress, kept returning to him. Their voices played in his head, not as random words, but as a call to do something real, something fast. Narendra Modi arrived early, walking into the courtyard with the same calm focus that had defined him for decades. He found Sundar sitting on a wooden bench, a notebook in hand, scribbling ideas. Planning already? Modi asked, sitting beside him. Yes, Sundar replied. Ma's words have been in my mind all night. She said a promise is only alive when it walks. I cannot go back to Delhi, give a speech, and call it action. I want to begin here. Modi gave a small nod, clearly approving. Good. Start where the roots are. But remember, roots are not just under the ground. They are also in people's hearts. A soft shuffle of feet made both men turn. Hiraba had stepped out into the courtyard, her white sari catching the morning light. Though she moved slowly, her presence felt unshakable. She looked at Sundar and asked simply, Beta, when will your promise walk? Today, Ma, he answered without hesitation. I have already called my team in Delhi. I want them to send not just computers, but the right kind, durable ones that can work even if there is no constant electricity. And I want a plan to bring internet to the school within a month. Hiraba listened quietly, then asked, And who will teach the children? Sundar paused. That will take more time. I will need to find teachers, train them, and keep them here. Hiraba shook her head gently. Then find people here. Train them. When help comes from within the village, it stays. Her words struck him. He had always believed in building local solutions, but here was the truth in its purest form. He smiled faintly. Ma, you are wiser than any strategy book I have read. As they spoke, a few villagers began to gather near the gate, curious about the visitor who had arrived with such attention. Some were skeptical. After all, many leaders and businessmen had passed through, made promises, and vanished. Sundar could see the doubt in their eyes. Narendra Modi stepped forward to address them. This man has not come to take photographs or make empty speeches. He has come to work, and Maya has given him her trust. So let us see what he can do. The words carried weight. The villagers slowly came closer. One man, older and weathered by years in the fields, spoke up. Sir, if you truly wish to help, start with fixing the roof of the school. In the rainy season, water drips onto the desks. The children can't study when their books are wet. Sundar looked at him and nodded. Done. That will be the first thing we repair. The computers can wait a week if they must. But the children should not have to study under a leaking roof. Something shifted in the crowd. The skepticism softened into cautious curiosity. Before noon, Sundar was at the school with a small team of local workers inspecting the roof. The building was old, its paint faded and walls cracked. Inside, The single dusty computer sat unused in the corner, its screen covered in fingerprints and its wires tangled. The boy with the notebook spotted him and ran up. "Sir, you came." "Of course," Sundar replied, kneeling to meet his eyes. "And I will keep coming until this school has what you need." As they talked, the girl in the blue dress peeked from behind the classroom door. Sundar waved her over. "Tell me, how many books are in your school library?" She lowered her head shyly. "There is no library, sir." The answer hit him like a quiet blow. A school without a library was like a heart without rhythm. He turned to one of the teachers and said, "Then we will make one. A small room to start, shelves, books, and even a few tablets so the children can read stories from anywhere in the world." By the end of the day, plans were in motion, the roof repair scheduled, a list of books being made, and villagers agreeing to help paint the school once the repairs were done. As the sun began to set, Sundar returned to the courtyard. Hiraba was waiting, her hands folded in her lap. "Beta," she said softly, "today your promise took its first steps. Tomorrow it must keep walking." Sundar smiled. "Ma, tomorrow it will run." And though he said it with confidence, deep inside he knew that the days ahead would test his patience, his resolve, and his ability to keep the fire of this promise alive. The next morning began not with excitement, but with the low hum of murmurs in the village square. Sundar Pichai, who had woken before sunrise to walk through the school grounds again, noticed the change almost immediately. The friendly curiosity from yesterday had been replaced by guarded looks and whispered conversations. He approached the tea stall near the main road, where a few elders sat in a circle. Their voices fell silent as he drew closer. Finally, one of them, a man with a thin frame and sharp eyes, spoke up. "Sir, we have seen many people come here with promises. They stay for a few days, then leave. The repairs stop halfway. The books never arrive. What makes you different?" Sundar understood the question was not an attack, but a challenge. He had grown up in a world where trust was earned, not handed freely. "You are right," he said calmly. "Words mean nothing without proof. That is why I am here every day. I am not here for photographs. I am here to finish what I started." Another man leaned forward. "And when you leave, will the school be forgotten?" Before Sundar could answer, Narendra Modi's voice came from behind. "That will not happen," he said firmly, stepping into the circle. "Because this is not just Sundar's promise. It is mine as well. Ma has given her blessing, and in our home, that blessing is not broken." The mention of Hiraba seemed to shift the air slightly. Her name carried weight in the village, not because she was the Prime Minister's mother, but because she was known for her quiet integrity. Later that morning, Sundar returned to the school with a group of young locals. These were college students from the nearby town who had responded to his call for volunteer teachers. Some came with skills in computers, others with a passion for teaching children how to read and write. The school's headmaster, a tired-looking man in his 40s, seemed surprised at the sudden burst of activity. "Sir," he said cautiously, "we appreciate your efforts, but you must know, many of these children work after school. Some in fields, some helping their families. They cannot stay long hours for classes." Sundar listened carefully. "Then we will adapt," he said. "Classes can be shorter, more focused. Even 1 hour a day of learning something new can change a child's life." As they began clearing a small room that would become the library, the girl in the blue dress appeared again. She stood in the doorway, holding a single torn page from a book. "Sir," she asked softly, "can I keep this?" Sundar knelt down to look. It was a page from an old storybook, worn and faded. "Why do you want just one page?" he asked gently. Her answer was simple, almost heartbreaking. "It is the only part of the story we have left." He didn't speak for a moment, the weight of her words settling in his chest. Then he smiled faintly. No, you will not keep just one page. You will keep whole books. The volunteers smiled at each other, the energy in the room growing. By midday, shelves had been brought in from a nearby carpentry shop, and the first set of books, donated by families from the town, had arrived. The children who wandered in touched the covers as if they were treasures. But even as progress was made, the whispers of doubt lingered. A group of older villagers stood outside the school, watching. One of them muttered, "Let us see if this man is still here next month." That evening, as Sundar sat in the courtyard with Hiraba, he told her about the doubts. She listened quietly, her eyes fixed on the fading light. "Beta," she said after a pause, "trust is not built in a day. When the rain comes once, the earth drinks but stays dry inside. When the rain comes again and again, the roots begin to drink deeply. Be the rain that returns." Her words gave him clarity. He realized this was not about finishing a project quickly. It was about showing up again and again until no one had to ask whether he would return. The next day, he would begin something bigger, something that would make even the doubters look twice. The morning air carried a rare buzz of energy. Word had spread overnight that something unusual was going to happen at the school. Children had whispered to each other as they fetched water. Parents had spoken in low voices as they prepared breakfast. And by mid-morning, small groups began making their way toward the old building. Sundar Pichai had spent the early hours with Narendra Modi and a team of volunteers, carefully setting up what he called a day for dreams. It was not just a name. He wanted this day to show the entire village what the school could be, what the children could become. When they arrived, they found the dusty courtyard of the school transformed. The broken benches had been repaired overnight. The walls had a fresh coat of paint, and colorful charts with alphabets, science diagrams, and motivational drawings hung from the classroom windows. Inside, the newly fixed roof no longer leaked sunlight through cracks. In one corner of the courtyard, a long table stood with a row of laptops, donated and brought in early that morning. They gleamed under the sun, the keys still untouched by small hands. Beside them, boxes filled with books waited to be placed in the shelves of the new library. The children arrived first, their steps quick, eyes wide with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The boy with the old notebook approached Sundar immediately. "Sir, are these really for us?" he asked, pointing at the laptops. "Yes," Sundar replied with a smile. "Not just for you, but for every child who walks into this school." The girl in the blue dress came next, holding the torn page she had shown him before. Sundar gently took it from her, then handed her a complete copy of the same storybook. "Now you can read the whole story," he said. By then, many villagers had gathered. Some stood at the edge of the courtyard, hesitant, while others moved closer. Narendra Modi stepped forward and addressed them, his voice steady. "Today is not a day for speeches. It is a day to see with your own eyes what is possible when we work together." He gestured for Sundar to begin. Sundar called the children in small groups to the laptops, showing them how to open educational games, type their names, and search for information. At first, the children were shy, afraid they might break something. But soon, the air filled with laughter and surprised gasps as they saw moving images on the screens, listened to stories in their language, and even heard songs they recognized. Outside, the older villagers watched with cautious interest. One man leaned toward another. "These are not the kind of promises we usually see," he murmured. This is different." The library opening came next. Sundar invited the children to step inside one by one. Each child was allowed to pick a book to borrow, and for some, it was the first time they had ever held a book of their own. Then came a moment no one had expected. Sundar turned to the crowd and said, "This is not just my project. This is your school, your library, your future. I will provide the tools, but you must keep them alive." An elderly woman stepped forward from the back of the crowd. She was bent with age, her hair a silver cloud, but her voice was strong. "Then I will come every morning to open the library," she said. "I cannot read much, but I will make sure the children get their books." Her words seemed to spark something. A young man offered to teach basic computer skills twice a week. Another promised to fix broken furniture whenever needed. Slowly, the wall between the project and the people began to dissolve. As the sun began to set, the courtyard was still full, children reading under trees, parents talking to teachers, and villagers discussing plans for a school garden. That evening, back in Hiraba's courtyard, Sundar sat quietly, his mind full. Hiraba watched him and asked, "Beta, what did you see today?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I saw the moment when the school stopped being mine and became theirs." Hiraba smiled faintly. "Good. Because things given to people can be lost, but things owned by the heart stay forever." He knew then that the promise had not just walked today, it had begun to run. But he also knew that the faster it ran, the more challenges would come chasing behind. 3 days after the Day for Dreams, the skies above Vadnagar turned heavy with dark clouds. The monsoon had arrived early, and the first night brought hours of unrelenting rain. Water rushed through narrow lanes, the earth softened, and the village air carried the smell of wet soil and the sound of distant thunder. At dawn, Sundar Pichai woke to the news he had feared. Parts of the school courtyard were flooded, and the freshly painted walls inside were already showing damp patches. Worse still, some of the laptops had been left in the library room, where water had seeped in from under the door. He rushed to the school, his shoes splashing through puddles. When he arrived, he saw the boy with the old notebook and the girl in the blue dress standing at the gate, each holding a laptop carefully wrapped in plastic bags. "We came early," the boy said breathlessly. "We wanted to save them." Inside, volunteers and teachers were already moving books to higher shelves. Narendra Modi arrived soon after, his kurta soaked at the edges. "The monsoon will test us," he said grimly. This is what Ma meant when she said a promise must keep walking. It has to walk through the rain, too. Sundar quickly organized the group. Some worked to clear water from the classrooms. Others covered the library shelves with tarpaulin. A few villagers arrived with sandbags to block the flow from the main road. Everyone moved with urgency, but despite their efforts, one corner of the library remained wet, and a small pile of donated books was ruined. As the day went on, the rain only grew heavier. By afternoon, doubts began to creep in among the villagers. "If this is what happens after 3 days, how will we protect it for years?" one man muttered. Another said, "Maybe this is too big for us." The words cut deep, not because they were meant to wound, but because they echoed a truth Sundar had faced before. When change meets its first test, it is fragile. He stepped outside into the rain, letting the water soak his shirt, and called for everyone to gather. "Listen to me," he said, raising his voice over the downpour. "This school, this library, this dream, it is not mine alone. If we want it to last, we must build it stronger than the storm. Today, we protect what we can. Tomorrow, we rebuild what we lost. But we do not stop." Narendra Modi, standing beside him, added, "A storm is not a reason to stop building. It is a reason to build better." The villagers looked at each other. Slowly, heads began to nod. That night, the rain eased, and by morning, the floodwater had started to drain. The damage was real, but not fatal. Sundar met with local masons and carpenters to plan stronger flooring and raised shelves for the library. He also arranged for waterproof storage for the laptops. The boy with the notebook came to see him later. "Sir," he said, "yesterday, when we were saving the laptops, I thought the rain would win. But now I think maybe we can win too." Sundar placed a hand on his shoulder. We will win, because we are not giving up. That evening, in the courtyard of Hiraba's home, she listened quietly as Sundar told her everything. When he finished, she said only one thing. Beta, even the strongest tree shakes in the wind. But the tree that bends and stands again, no storm can uproot it. And in that moment, Sundar understood. The storm had not slowed the promise. It had tested it, and in doing so, made it stronger. A week after the storm, the skies above Vadnagar cleared. The village smelled fresh, washed clean by the rain, but the school grounds still bore the marks of the struggle. Mud stains on the walls, patched areas on the courtyard, and stacks of damp books drying in the sun. Sundar Pichai stood in the middle of the school, looking around at the work still left to do. This time, there was no hesitation in the faces of the villagers. The doubt that had shadowed their eyes before was gone. Instead, there was quiet determination. Narendra Modi arrived with Hiraba beside him. She moved slowly, but her gaze swept across the school with care. The children gathered quickly, their chatter filling the air. Ma wanted to see the school for herself, Modi said. Hiraba walked into the library first. The new raised shelves were in place, lined with books that had survived the rain. At the back of the room, volunteers were unpacking fresh boxes filled with replacements for those that had been damaged. She reached for a book and ran her fingers across the cover, then turned to Sundar. Beta, she said. The storm came, but the books are still here. That means the promise is still here. Sundar smiled, feeling the weight of her words. Ma, this promise is no longer mine alone. It belongs to everyone here. The boy with the old notebook and the girl in the blue dress stood near the doorway, waiting patiently. Hiraba noticed them and beckoned them forward. And what will you two do with this promise? She asked. The boy straightened his back. I will learn, Ma. Then I will teach others. The girl spoke softly but clearly. I will read all the books in the library, then I will write my own. Hiraba's eyes shone with quiet pride. She turned to the gathered villagers. You see, this is how it should be. A promise given to one person can be lost. A promise given to many will find a home. Outside, the courtyard was alive with movement. Masons repaired the last cracks in the walls. Carpenters finished the benches, and a group of mothers had gathered to clean and plant flowers along the school's edge. Narendra Modi looked at Sundar. When you first came here, some doubted you. Now they work beside you. That is the real change. By afternoon, the entire village was present for the reopening ceremony. There were no grand speeches, no banners, just the people standing together, the children holding books and small flags, and the quiet sound of the library door unlocking for the first time since the rain. Sundar addressed them briefly. This school is proof that change is not brought by one person. It is carried by many hands. My part is small, the rest is yours. Hiraba, standing beside him, placed her hand on his arm. Beta, today your promise has found its home. Now it will live longer than we will. As the sun dipped low, the boy with the notebook sat under a tree, typing on one of the laptops. The girl in the blue dress sat nearby, already halfway through her first borrowed book. Their laughter carried across the courtyard, mixing with the voices of villagers making plans for the next project, a community science lab. For Sundar, it was clear. The promise that had started in a quiet courtyard beside Hiraba, Modi had grown roots here in Vadnagar. It would keep walking through sunshine and storm, carried by the very people it was meant for. And as he looked at Hiraba, watching the children, he understood one last thing. Sometimes the most powerful change begins not with money or machines, but with an invitation to sit beside someone who believes in you.